Disappearing without a single word isn't just an act of leaving, it's an act of power, but not the power of arrogance or ego. It's the power of self-worth. When you disappear quietly, without anger, without warning, you don't just remove your presence, you remove her access to it. And that right there hits differently, because while attention can be manipulated, silence can't. And while words can be twisted, your absence speaks a truth she can't control. What happens in the mind and heart of a woman when a man doesn't chase, doesn't beg, doesn't explain, but simply exits with peace and finality? That's what this message is about, because sometimes the loudest transformation begins after you leave the room. She won't tell you this. She may not even know it herself. But the first thing she feels when you disappear is not heartbreak. It's not sadness. It's not longing. It's the bruising silence that hits her ego like a wave, unexpected and uncontrollable. Because whether she admitted it or not, your presence was her mirror. Your responses, your availability, your energy, those were the cues that validated her power. Even if she acted indifferent, even if she pulled away first, even if she made it seem like she was the one calling the shots, your willingness to stay, to explain, to be accessible, gave her a sense of control. And when you vanish, you don't just leave a space where you once stood, you leave her with no control over the narrative. That's what her ego can't handle. It's not that you're gone, it's that she doesn't get to decide how you left. And worse, she doesn't know if you're ever coming back. That uncertainty isn't romantic. It's devastating to the part of her that thought she had you figured out. She may scroll through your old conversations with narrowed eyes, not out of affection, but calculation. She'll try to understand how you detached. When did it start? What did she miss? Was it the tone of your last reply? The delay in your final response? The subtle indifference you mastered before your silence set in? She will analyze it all, not because she's in love, but because her ego is wounded by your unspoken exit. There is nothing more jarring to a woman who once believed she had emotional influence over you than to realize that influence was an illusion. That sting, that's her pride trying to hold itself together while her mind spirals in questions, not about how you are, but about how she lost the grip, how she didn't see this coming, how a man she thought would always orbit her suddenly disappeared into himself without flinching. She'll tell herself stories to soothe the internal tension. He must be playing games. He'll be back when he misses me. He's trying to get a reaction. All those statements are ego in disguise. They're strategies to mask vulnerability with superiority, because it's easier to believe that you're operating out of emotional immaturity than it is to accept that you simply evolved past her chaos, that you chose your peace over her unpredictability. And that's the most painful realization of all. When a man disappears, not in rage, not in reaction, not in revenge, but in stillness, without drama, without seeking closure or recognition, that is the death blow to a woman's ego. Not because he hurt her, but because he finally stopped letting her ego hurt him. She may look composed on the outside. She might post more, laugh louder, seem unbothered, but her mind will circle the last moment she felt she had your attention, and her ego will compare it to now, where she sits in silence, no longer sure she matters. She will feel the weight of the void you left long before her heart registers the absence, because ego feels the cold faster than the heart feels the ache. And when a woman realizes that the power she thought she held over you was temporary, that it relied on your willingness to be influenced, that's when the inner conflict begins. Not because she wants you back, but because she can't stand how peacefully you walked away from a place she never imagined you'd outgrow. And that quiet suffering, it's the sound of ego facing the truth. It never had you the way it thought it did. It's strange how the mind works when silence settles in. At first, it's just the absence of noise, a stillness that feels like space finally reclaimed. But slowly, that space starts to echo. And in those echoes, a woman begins to remember not the arguments, not the flaws, not the things she used to complain about, but the softness she once dismissed, the efforts she overlooked, the presence she assumed would never leave. That's when the mind begins rewriting the script. She starts to romanticize the ordinary, the subtle, the reliable parts of you she once minimized. She'll suddenly remember the way you used to listen when she spoke, not just hearing words, but holding them with attentiveness. She'll think of the way you responded when she pulled away, steady, patient, unwilling to match her chaos. She'll replay those quiet moments where you were there without asking anything in return, where your masculine calm met her feminine storm with a silence that felt like safety. She didn't value it then because she didn't feel the cost of losing it. See, the human mind doesn't measure love when it's overflowing. It measures it when the well runs dry. And when your voice is no longer in her notifications, when your name stops showing up in her energy, that's when her heart begins to hunger for the very things she once left starving. The warmth of your presence becomes a memory she replays with new colors. The way you would try to understand her instead of dominate her, how you stayed through her distance, how you never made her earn your loyalty. Those moments grow in value because now, in your absence, she has nothing that compares, and the mind, left with nothing new to hold on to, begins polishing the past. It takes your consistency, your calm, your support, and wraps it in gold leaf, romanticizing it into something she now believes was rare. She'll start wondering if maybe you were the one. Maybe she misread you. Maybe she was too in her head, too guarded, too distracted by her own wounds to realize what she had. That romanticism is not always real love. It's a reaction to loss. It's her subconscious way of trying to bring you back by idealizing what she once rejected. Because when someone disappears in peace, without malice, without making it a scene, it forces the other person to look inward. And what she sees now is a man who was present even when she was absent. A man who gave without needing applause, a man who stayed grounded when she tried to pull him into emotional turbulence. That version of you, which she once labeled boring or predictable, is now her symbol of stability, her fantasy of what it felt like to be anchored in a world that now feels shaky without you. Her friends may hear her say things like, "He was actually really good to me," or "I think I pushed away someone who really cared." But those words don't come from clarity. They come from distance, because distance turns consistency into mystery. It turns calmness into emotional mastery. It turns your quiet loyalty into the kind of masculine presence she suddenly finds lacking in everyone else. Now that you're not there to respond, not there to prove yourself again, she has nothing to fight against. So she starts fighting within, and that internal conflict reshapes her perception of you. The same man she once criticized for not being exciting enough, not being unpredictable enough, now becomes the one man who brought her nervous system peace. The one man who didn't seek to manipulate her emotions. The one man who showed up with quiet strength when she didn't know how to receive it. And it's in that reflection, in that hunger for something she once thought she could easily replace, that she begins romanticizing the very version of you she let slip through her fingers without ever fully seeing it for what it was. Control is a silent addiction. It doesn't scream for attention, but it quietly shapes how someone navigates a connection. And for many women, especially those who are used to being desired, pursued, and emotionally prioritized, control becomes the language of security. When she knows she can trigger a response from you, whether it's anger, apology, or affection, she feels grounded in the invisible grip she holds over your emotions. It isn't always malicious. Sometimes it's subconscious. But the moment you stop reacting, the moment you remove your energy and simply disappear without resistance, her control begins to tremble. She reaches for the old patterns, the emotional strings she used to pull, only to find they no longer work. Her jokes don't land the same. Her silence no longer bothers you. Her presence doesn't magnetize you like it used to. And in that space, she comes face to face with something far more confronting than rejection: irrelevance. Because when a man who once cared deeply no longer fights, explains, or chases, it doesn't feel like indifference. It feels like liberation, and that realization terrifies her. She begins to sense that her emotional leverage has expired. The game she unconsciously played has ended, and not on her terms. That soft power she used to exert, not through dominance, but through emotional unpredictability, has crumbled into dust because you no longer engage in the dance. And there's something deeply disorienting about that, especially for a woman who's used to having her energy dictate the emotional temperature of the room. Your disappearance doesn't just create space, it breaks the very structure of interaction she built with you. It's no longer push and pull. There's no more resistance. There's just stillness. And in that stillness, her control, once so subtle and confident, becomes irrelevant. Now she has to sit with the reality that she's not in the driver's seat, not because you took the wheel, but because you left the car entirely. You've exited the emotional dynamic, closed the door without drama, and walked away with quiet conviction. And what hurts her more than the loss is the realization that she can't fix it. There's no argument to win, no apology to extract, no moment of emotional victory where she feels validated again. What she faces now is the echo of her own attempts to manipulate, to test, to see how far she could stretch the connection before it broke. And now that it has, cleanly, without noise, she has no script left to follow. The blueprint she relied on for emotional control no longer exists. Your absence didn't just remove you, it erased her sense of dominance. What most men don't realize is that the woman who tests you emotionally isn't looking for chaos. She's looking for confirmation. Confirmation that she matters, that she holds weight in your world, that she can influence your mood. And when that influence fades, when your peace becomes untouchable, her emotional framework collapses. She doesn't know what to do with a man she can't move, a man she can't predict, a man she can no longer reach in the ways she used to. That collapse doesn't look like tears or apologies. It looks like silence, prolonged reflective silence, because she's not used to powerlessness. She's not used to watching the man who once gave her everything now give nothing, not out of resentment, but out of evolution. And the most shattering part of all is the knowledge that she can't bring back the version of you who once reacted, once responded, once believed that her emotional intensity was love rather than control. That version of you has vanished into growth. And with it, so did her ability to lead the dynamic through emotion, manipulation, or fear of loss. She didn't just lose a man. She lost the mirror that made her feel emotionally significant. And now she's forced to see herself without that reflection, without that anchor, without that control. Self-reflection doesn't arrive when things are easy. It shows up when silence becomes unbearable, when answers aren't handed to you, and when the presence you used to take for granted becomes a memory instead of a guarantee. When a woman experiences the quiet vanishing of a man who once gave her his attention, time, and emotional investment. Something subtle but powerful begins to unfold inside her. It's not always visible on the surface. She might still smile, post, and pretend, but underneath all of that, there is a stirring. Because for the first time in a long time, she's alone with her own energy. And not the curated, filtered version she presents to the world, but the raw, unedited version she's been avoiding. Your absence doesn't just take you out of her life, it removes the emotional distraction she used to use as a shield from looking inward. All the focus she once projected outward on what you were doing, how you were reacting, whether you were still interested, now has no place to land. So it ricochets back to her. She starts to ask herself questions she never had to answer before. Why did she push him away? Why did she feel the need to test his love? Why was it so hard to receive instead of control? And most importantly, why did she not see his peace as valuable until it was gone? That's the crack in the foundation where real self-awareness begins. Because when a man detaches from a woman not out of anger but out of growth, it creates a vacuum, one that can't be filled with rebounds, distractions, or validation. It's a vacuum that demands truth. It demands that she look at how she showed up, not just in moments of affection, but in moments where she could have chosen understanding instead of power, softness instead of control. She begins to replay conversations, not to miss you, but to analyze herself in them. She notices the dismissiveness in her tone, the emotional walls she built, the moments when you tried to connect and she chose to test instead. And that's where the real shift happens, not because you told her who she was, but because you left in such peace that she had no one else to argue with except herself. That is where silence becomes the greatest mirror. Because now every trigger she feels in your absence is a spotlight on her own inner wounds. The jealousy, the insecurity, the need for control, those things aren't about you. They're about the parts of her that were left unhealed long before she met you. But it's only now, when you've taken your energy back, that she's forced to face them. This isn't punishment, it's awakening. She thought your presence was her validation. Now she realizes that it was also her teacher. And the final lesson was given when you walked away without slamming the door. That kind of exit doesn't scream because it doesn't need to. It leaves behind a calm so unsettling that she has no choice but to confront what she contributed to the disconnection. She's left with the version of herself that you once accepted. And now she has to decide if she can continue being that woman without someone enabling her emotional habits. Growth doesn't come from being adored endlessly. It comes when the adoration stops and you realize you have to become someone worth keeping without being begged to change. That's the mirror your absence hands her, not as revenge, but as a final invitation for her to meet the woman she kept avoiding while you kept showing up. When a woman realizes that a man who once adored her, pursued her, gave her his attention and emotional presence has walked away without noise, without drama, and without needing her validation anymore, something deeper than loss begins to occur within her. It's not just sadness or confusion, it's identity disruption, a quiet unraveling of the image she once held of herself through your eyes. Because when you were there, consistently, she was able to use your energy to define her worth, to gauge how desirable she was, how magnetic, how in control she could be. But when that mirror disappears, she's left staring at a version of herself that no longer feels confirmed by your presence. And that's when the questions start creeping in. Questions she never asked herself before because your devotion distracted her from ever needing to. Was she actually enough, or was she just used to being chased, desired, and chosen by men who hadn't yet seen through her emotional armor? And now that someone like you, calm, grounded, and emotionally disciplined, has detached without rage, has removed yourself without explanation. She can't lean on the usual narratives anymore. She can't tell herself that you were just another man trying to control her, or that you weren't man enough to handle her, because the way you exited was not weakness. It was power, a kind of silent power that doesn't seek applause. And that power forces her to ask, if I was everything I thought I was, why did he leave so peacefully? Why didn't he fight harder to stay? And why does his indifference feel like the most deafening echo in the room? Because deep down, every woman wants to believe that she is unforgettable, that no matter what happens, she leaves a mark so strong that a man will orbit around the memory of her forever. But when she sees you living your life, growing, glowing, completely detached from her gravitational pull, she starts to wonder if the value she assigned to herself was real or just a performance built on temporary attention. And this is where the ego and the soul begin to clash inside her. The ego wants to tell her that you were weak, that you couldn't handle her, but the soul knows the truth. The soul sees the quiet self-respect in the way you left, in the way you didn't beg, in the way you didn't try to force love out of someone who didn't know how to receive it. And now she's left asking herself the questions that cut deeper than any breakup. Was I nurturing or just demanding? Was I present? Or just emotionally entitled? Did I offer love? Or was I just using his love to inflate my own sense of worth? And these reflections don't come easy, because questioning your own value isn't about surface level confidence. It's about looking at the way you treat people who love you. It's about evaluating how you respond when someone shows you consistency, protection, and leadership without needing to control you. And when she realizes that she responded to real masculine peace with resistance, emotional games, and power struggles, it forces a deeper reckoning, not just about you, but about the kind of woman she has become, the kind of woman who thought she could always have access to your energy no matter how she treated it. And now that you've reclaimed it, now that you've stopped chasing, stopped proving, stopped trying to fix what she wouldn't even acknowledge was broken, she begins to sit in the discomfort of her own reflection. And in that stillness, in that silence, the question that burns the loudest inside her isn't whether you'll come back. It's whether she was ever truly worthy of the man you were when you were still trying to love her right, when a woman has spent months or even years being the center of your emotional gravity, when she has grown accustomed to the rhythm of your presence, your calls, your availability, your emotional investment. And then one day, all of that vanishes without warning, without drama, without chaos. Something begins to shake inside her that she cannot name, because the absence doesn't arrive with explanation or clarity. It arrives like fog, silent, thick, disorienting, and impossible to hold. And that's what begins the chase, not for you, but for closure. Because while she may not have responded to your love with gratitude or your efforts with reciprocity, she always believed that she held the power to decide how the story would end. And when you take that choice away by simply removing your energy and walking away in peace, she begins to unravel in search of something to anchor herself with, some text, some call, some final conversation that will bring her the validation her ego craves and the control she lost. But here's the part that destabilizes her more than anything else. The more she reaches for that closure, the less she finds it, because your silence is not a tactic. It's a boundary. It's a decision. It's a message that says you don't need her to validate your pain, and she doesn't know what to do with that, because she's used to being chased, argued with, begged for clarity. She's used to men who cannot let go, men who need to talk one more time, explain one more thing, get one last emotional fix before they finally walk away. But when you disappear without needing that final interaction, She realizes that there's no emotional hook left to pull. And so she starts searching, not just for answers about what happened, but for reassurance that she wasn't the villain in your story. And the problem is, you've taken your story with you. You've reclaimed your narrative and stopped giving her the script. So now she's left replaying the past, looking for signs, scanning through old messages, revisiting conversations, trying to locate the exact moment you detached, trying to find clues in things you said or didn't say, trying to analyze the tone of your last message or the timing of your withdrawal. But nothing adds up in a way that gives her peace. And that's where the real confusion begins, because closure for most women isn't about the truth. It's about emotional control. It's about receiving something that confirms her version of the story, something that recenters her in a position of emotional power. But when she doesn't get that, when she realizes that you have exited her world without permission, her mind goes to war with itself, one side trying to justify why you left, the other side refusing to accept that maybe you left, because staying would have cost you your peace, your integrity, your dignity, and that kind of silent exit rewrites her role in the entire dynamic, because now she's no longer the one who ended things, who called the shots, who had the last word. She's the one who got left behind without an explanation. And while her ego screams for a reason, a response, a reaction, her heart is too proud to admit she's hurting. So she wears confusion like armor, pretending she doesn't care while obsessively scrolling through your online presence, wondering why you're okay, why you're smiling, why you haven't reached out. And yet every unanswered question only leads to another layer of emotional uncertainty. And eventually she starts to feel trapped between the image she wants to uphold and the reality she's too ashamed to admit, that she lost access not just to your attention, but to a version of herself that only existed in your presence. And the closure she so desperately craves is now buried beneath the very silence she once thought would never come from you. When a man chooses to walk away, not with bitterness, not with chaos, but with quiet resolve, he doesn't just end a connection, he reclaims himself. He detaches from the story that drained his strength and reattaches to the truth of his worth. And in that silence, in that graceful disappearance, something unexpected begins to unfold. She starts to feel everything she once numbed. Her ego reacts before her heart even understands what's been lost. She begins to rewrite the past in her mind, replaying the moments she dismissed, romanticizing the present she took for granted, clinging to the illusion of control that your absence shatters. She searches for closure, but all she finds is herself staring into the mirror of her own behavior. She begins to question not just who you were, but who she was when you were near. Your peace, your distance, your detachment all become reminders of a standard she failed to meet, a version of you she never truly appreciated until it was too late. And now the man she ignored, doubted, or underestimated becomes the lesson she never thought she'd have to learn. Disappearing wasn't about punishing her, it was about honoring you. And in that sacred space of self-respect, you didn't just walk away from her, you walked into the man you were always meant to become. That silence, it echoed louder than any words you could have spoken, and she will feel it long after your presence is gone.